Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this month's Worksoft webinar. I'm Austin Chandler, Digital Content Specialist for Worksoft and your webinar host. Today, we'll explore how to elevate process assurance with codeless test automation. Now let's meet today's speaker. Ty Henson is the Director of Solution Architects for Worksoft. Ty has over 30 years of experience in IT and applications. He has served in a variety of development, QA, and leadership positions, providing him with an acute understanding of the challenges top firms face mitigating risk in complex systems. Ty has worked with Worksoft products for over 15 years and is a recognized expert at helping clients realize the benefits of sustainable test automation. Today, he'll be sharing proven practices to speed innovation and reduce risk with automated testing for complex packaged apps and beyond. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Ty.
All right, thank you, Austin. Good day to everyone, and thank you for joining me. I have some very valuable information for you today, and I'm going to hopefully disseminate very valuable visions for you, because I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we're going to take a look today at why test automation. It sounds like many of you are headed down that journey, and that's fantastic to hear. We believe strongly here at Worksoft that automation has entered the realm that it's no longer nice to have, but really necessary to have to keep up with the demands of testing, for example, specifically. And so what I'd like to do is assist today by providing 3 testing best practices that we're aware of to help you achieve the results that you need with automation. As a part of that, not only will there be a demonstration, I plan to do actually several demonstrations along the way, probably a little demo heavy, and then a little bonus at the end for measuring value. And it was clear that though many have a little bit of a bead on doing that, there's a mechanism that can actually make this quite simple and easy to do. So let's get started. Oh, and at the end, we'll take some questions. So based on a recent poll from ASUG and Worksoft actually sponsored this. These were the results around why test automation, and they're very positive. Basically, I love to see that 79% reporting that it reduces manual low-tier work. 72% frees time for employees to work on more important tasks. Great advantage, no doubt, with automation. In fact, I've already referred to it as a need to have. But automation is not automagical. Worksoft is continually trying to make it as magical as we can. Like with anything, there are best practices designed to help you achieve these results and more. And the Worksoft solution is designed around helping you do this. So the first best practice we're going to talk about today is test your applications exactly the way the users use them. So years ago, I was selling some automation and working with a prospect, and he pretty much said, "I'm not sure I need your solution. I have 6,000 testers." And I was floored. I thought that was amazing. And in the end, he continued to say, "Yeah, it's my production users." So I began to realize over time that his concept is not bad, but he certainly is not the right way to apply it. Clearly, we need to be more risk averse with the changes that we're introducing. And I don't think that gentleman had experienced a P1 outage, but I think he would understand a little better if in fact he does, or when he finally did. So let's break this down in a couple of ways. Without getting into specific methodologies, the fastest and best way to move from manual to automation is to automate regression testing. This will help you create a firewall of testing to keep bad things from getting into production. So in general, we want to use full end-to-end processes that our users are doing every day. And here's a representation. Basically, what we're seeing here is the fact that automation should be able to take us through mobile, through things like Fiori and web in general, SaaS-based applications, to on-premise Java and .NET applications, including Microsoft Office and even green screen or mainframe in particular. Today's business processes are quite complex, and our users are transversing several applications to accomplish the task at hand. Well, the automation needs to test the applications the exact same way the users are doing that. And there are automation products out there that allow us to do this comprehensively in this way. The other thing is that we need to test at the UI layer the exact same way that the users are using the application. When we capture activity from the user, it's building automation to replay that the exact same way that the manual user would. Many talk about API testing, for example. Let's insert that. Yes, it has its place in the world, and Worksoft can assist with that as well, but it is not comprehensive enough to test your applications with just APIs. There's often functional and/or structural logic at the UI layers that needs to also be tested. So that reminds me of another story. In working with a cellular company, a large one, I was told the story when we were introduced about the time that they had introduced a change into their e-commerce application. They were selling with this application, yet the change that they introduced had inadvertently removed the purchase button from just the website that was being used, but only in one browser. And that change was much higher than any APIs or web services that were involved that were being tested. It was at the UI layer. Yet by not catching that for a period of time, they were losing 25% of their revenue because the users of that particular browser were not capable to purchase products on their website. So testing at the UI level is extremely important to be comprehensively testing your applications and making sure that they're working. With Worksoft, everything remains codeless and therefore collaborative. Capture makes it fast, and we're going to take a quick look at that today together. Reusability of processes makes it easy to manage and maintain. And reusability of objects, that is the things that we interact with to perform the automation, is completely automatic, providing dynamic change resilience. So what I'd like to do now is take a little bit of time to jump into a sandbox and demonstrate for you our capture all the way into automation. To do that, I'm going to bounce to a workstation and bring up a few things, and I'll just explain along the way. I'm going to start by bringing up our automation editor, and using a simple right-click operation, I'm going to launch what I keep referring to as capture. On the other side, let's bring up an SAP GUI screen, for example. And capture is intended to literally collect the actions that the users are performing by just monitoring that activity. So by starting the capture with the big red button on the right, I'm going to come over to my GUI screen and start down the path of entering an order. You can see that my capture window is starting to take on some steps, and that's the intent. Basically, with everything that I do, it is capturing that automation. It's using an English narrative to describe every step along the way. It's capturing the imagery of the objects that I'm interacting with so that we can throw that into documentation. And in the end, when I click save and bring this back in, let's call this our GUI example. We immediately have access to that automation asset. We call it a process. So here are the steps. And the very first thing I'd like to do for you is kind of highlight this narrative to show you that the narrative that was being generated within capture has carried forward right into the automation editor for my very clear understanding of what we have just captured together in automation form. But I also immediately want to click the run button, because basically I'm going to start by stepping through the first couple of steps just to show you that we are not using programming. This is completely code-free, yet we are able to replay those steps. So here we have entered the transaction code, and as I step through, it's continuing down the path of replaying what we just captured together. So basically, extremely quickly, by just turning on capture, we have built automation. And I'm even blanking out one of those fields because my history filled them back in for me, but let me show you. The automation is doing the job. And when I click run, it will continue down the path of finishing those steps and then immediately bring back the results to the screen because I ran it interactively. Every step has passed. So basically what's happening here is through the use of capture, we are we are very rapidly building automation. And in the end, we're doing it in a programming-free or a codeless way. So the narrative helps to describe every step along the way. Yet, just to point this out, because it's an integral part to our sustainability, what we're really doing is learning the objects that the user interacts with and setting the action that we witness them doing. And if I expand my screen just a little bit, you can see here that the action then even becomes a simple dropdown. So later we'll talk a little bit more about maintenance, but when I need to make changes, I don't need to be a programmer to make that happen. I simply can use dropdowns, I can drag and drop steps to reorder them, and we'll take a closer look. We can drag and drop processes together to extend into end-to-end examples. So basically, Capture became so powerful for us that we decided to package it into distributable form. Let's park my automation editor for the moment, and let's park the GUI and head for a different application. Let me explain. I'll now bring up, I have it here, Salesforce Lightning. So I believe that some of you were interested in hearing about Salesforce. It was one of the applications listed on our abstract. And what I'm going to do is bring up that standalone version of Capture. This is now just a small element that I can very easily distribute out to my users' desktops to allow them to be contributors. And in the exact same way that we just did that together from the editor, now users are able to contribute. So by turning on the red button, and in this case, in Salesforce Lightning, I'm going to head down the path of creating an opportunity. So a little bit of navigation to get there, using some clicks, some links. I'd like to get into the opportunity screen and then reinforce something for you visually. Basically, as the user, I'm just doing the job. I'm putting in the data that's needed, and Capture is picking up all of those steps. But this is automation immediately being built on the fly. And that's what makes the whole process so quick. To show you exactly what I'm talking about, in this case, I'm going to blank out the amount field and then go back into my Capture window and highlight that particular step where it sees that I input 1755 into the amount field. I'm going to ask it just to replay that step. And what Capture is going to do is reach out and find the application and perform that action. I just wanted to reinforce the fact that what we're looking at goes well beyond documentation, though it is certainly very extremely powerful in that way. But it is also immediate automation that provides the bulk of our ability to replay these steps on behalf of those manual testers. That's the intent, is we want to test the applications the exact same way that the users are using them, but we also want to do that with automation to replace that tedious manual activity. So let's head for another application. I'll go ahead and clear this one out for a moment. Close some things out. In preparing for this, we understood that there was some interest around Oracle as well. So I'm going to bring up my Oracle EBS system. And of course, we support Oracle Cloud and many other things for that matter, but just trying to showcase a few things today that we see prevalent in the market. So I've got my Capture up and running. I'm going to, the same way we've been doing, click the Start button and head into my Oracle EBS system. And as you can see, along the way, we're picking up the steps that I'm using to navigate through this system, and in this case, to get to the purchase order form. Takes my Oracle form a moment to launch. Maybe some of you experienced the same, but I'd like to co-locate them on the screen. And bear with me for 1 second, because I want to make sure that I've asked Capture to look at my Oracle form. This gives me an opportunity to show you that we are in control of what Capture is picking up. It's not just being big brother and picking up everything on the desktop, but we can specifically indicate what we want to capture. And I simply wanted to make sure that I did in fact have Oracle Forms turned on. We're in good shape, so I'm going to start the Capture back up and just do a couple of steps here to showcase Oracle EBS as well. Let's put in a supplier. In fact, I've got a lot to show today, so I want to make sure we're able to get through everything. Let's just stop there. And I wanted to reinforce once again that what we're doing in terms of capturing this activity is capturing automation that gives us the opportunity to generate documentation. So once again, I'm going to highlight the step of entering the supplier, and by clicking the execute button, it's going to reach back in and type in that value into the application. I simply wanted to use these visuals to reinforce the understanding of how powerful this is in what we're providing. Let's do one more. I'm going to go ahead and close out of my Oracle application, and we'll see a little bit of these applications shortly as well, because we're going to get into running an end-to-end scenario, much like was being suggested in the best practice that we're talking about today. Along the way, I'm just going to try to keep my desktop a little more clean and eliminate any possible confusion. So we'll close out of this application. And last but not least, I'd like to head over to my Fiori application. Once again, just kind of co-locating these things on the screen. And I'm not going to collect the login on this one, and I'll explain why briefly. We're going to talk a little bit more about reusability, and the login is certainly one of those areas where we start, though it goes well beyond the login. But once again, my capture is prepped and ready. I'm going to simply turn it on and head down the path within my SAP Fiori screen of placing an order. And once again, we should witness that step by step, as I perform these actions, they are being documented. And now we've learned that, in fact, the automation is being built along the way. Once again, let's do that together. I'm going to pause my capture and go back and just reinforce here, even with Fiori, these are complex applications that we have tamed to the point of collecting the automation, or we refer to it as discovering the automation, quite easily. So in this case, I've blanked out my order type field. I'm highlighting that step, and I'm going to replay that, in which case we will find the Fiori application, type back in that value, and witness the automation doing the job. In the end, the whole point about this capture experience is that it provides the opportunity for us to very rapidly collect the activity from the user. And what that means is that we simply can build our automation not only much more quickly, but we can do it the exact same way that the users use the application. And that's the entire point. As a result, we also have the ability to provide the documentation. So I'd like to now go to an example of capture giving me the documentation of the activity that we were just talking about. In this particular case, I'm bringing up a document to represent the fact that capture was started. We're seeing a functional flow at the top of my document as to what the user has performed. But as we go down through this, what happens is that capture turns on or captures a screenshot at the moment that it's turned on. And then it is collecting the narratives and the object imagery along the way to represent everything that the user has done. And in fact, in this case, the user, which was me, went through not only the Fiori order, but I left capture on, and I apologize, I'm not trying to make anybody dizzy, but I do want to scroll down that after completing the order, I simply bounced over to the GUI, and we saw some of that before, and I fluidly continued the process to perform the delivery. The point being here, and we were seeing the slide about the end-to-end activity, we want to test these systems the exact same way the users are using them, and clearly, capture gives us the ability to facilitate that. Let's bring up just a couple of other examples to hit on the different applications that we've been talking about. We took a look at Lightning as well, and so not surprisingly, the document will look very similar. We do have aesthetic control and configuration for the logo. We want this to turn this into your company's document, but the meat or the heart of this document is basically this step-by-step information. Now, why is this so valuable? Well, basically, historically, someone had to sit down and write this document using copy and paste and get the data together and have the credentials right to hand it off to a programmer to get this automated. We've thrown technology at all of that pain, and we are automatically building the automation, building the documentation, and providing the functional understanding, like the flow that we see at the top, by just allowing the user to go through and capture that process. Consider it manual testing one last time. And just to be comprehensive, let's get all the way into including Oracle as well. We were doing a little bit of capture in Oracle, and not surprisingly, we can capture all of that. So similarly, the document will represent very much what I was doing, but a little bit more in terms of getting down the path of entering the purchase order into the system. Okay, so I think that we've set that stage pretty well. What I'd like to do now is consider the fact that when we have the user capture this activity, it immediately becomes available to us in automation form. And that's really the important part here. We want to be able to use that to do all of this tedious repetitive testing on behalf of the user, and to do it the same way that the user performs that activity. So I closed one too many windows. Let me get back in here, and I want to show you that the captured steps that we were just witnessing, very much like the way that we began, are available now in the automation editor. And yet we have the ability to extend them if needed. So for example, my captures go into a particular folder. Let me get to the right one here. And I have the ability to bring this up. Let me set the stage by saying that capture is going to realistically give us anywhere from 60 to 90% of the end product. It has captured all of the steps. It has provided the gist of the automation that we need to repeat that activity. But in the end, there are absolutely and usually some final edits that we're going to perform. One of those would be, for example, let's have it log in as the right user. So in this case, I'm going to search for my Fiori logon process. I have found that, and I'm just going to literally drag it into my steps. And in fact, even drag it up to the top to make sure that we are first logging in and then performing these steps. The entire point here is that when I search for pre-existing automation, these are things that I've either captured before or someone else has captured before, and I can reuse that. When I do the drag and drop, I am not duplicating the logon process, I'm sharing it. And that means if it gets changed, it automatically those changes propagate to everywhere that it's being used. And that's extremely powerful in reducing the effort involved to maintain automation over time. Not only are we the most sustainable and requiring the least amount of maintenance, but when maintenance is needed, why not have provide that with the least amount of effort necessary. So you may be able to even see that my Fiori logon is grayed out a little bit. That's just an opportunity for me to tell you the fact that we can also granularly control what your users can see and do within the system. We've locked this thing down so that we won't inadvertently make changes to it, and that makes it a great process to share and leverage. And in this case, now that I've dragged it in, I can use that for these steps and replay this order in more comprehensive form. So let's click the run button and have the steps do the job for us in the form of launching the browser, navigating to my Fiori system. These steps were designed to check for some things along the way and set some settings, but ultimately then, I believe, maximize the screen and enter the credentials and head down the path of doing the order. There we go. And here are the steps that we were capturing together in terms of putting in the order information on the first page, heading to the next page. Really, whatever that user would normally do, they shouldn't be thinking about how can I accommodate this with automation. It should just be about what do I need to do to accomplish my task at hand, and the automation should be able to pick that up and represent that user in true form. And that's what we've just witnessed here in the form of the automation doing the Fiori order. Now, it goes well beyond this. That drag and drop that I did, for example, and once again, just going to clean up my desktop to try to keep things not confusing. The drag and drop for Fiori could go well beyond that. The next thing that I might look for is, for example, the delivery. Let's search for the VL01N. I can find that process, I can drag it in, and now I've extended it. Maybe the next thing that we're going to do is head for Ariba, and I can search for, in this case, the create requisition process, which is actually quite involved, and extend. And you can see through simple drag and drop, I'm not duplicating assets, but sharing them. The reusability is providing my ability to very rapidly extend this to a true end-to-end scenario. Now, of course, the steps have to make sense. I'm not trying, I said that automation is not automagical. I simply wanted to convey the ease of use around putting these things together. And in the end, what I'd like to do is show you an example of going through several applications in true end-to-end form. To do that, I'm going to head back to another folder here and bring up one that has many of the things that we've been talking about today in terms of the applications. Let's get this underway and I'll explain along the way. So this one is designed to start off with a .NET account manager and either find or build the account that's needed for doing the testing. We've satisfied all of those steps, saved the account, and then we've closed that application. Next, I believe we are headed for the Oracle application, much like we were capturing and doing together. And so you were witness to how these steps originally came together. In fact, the purchase orders that I perform are a little more straightforward. I had a user capture the purchase order process in this case because it was a better and true representation of exactly how the purchase orders are entered into the system. In this case, the EBS form is loading. And there will be several steps to get through this, but in the end, all of them are going through what the users do on a regular basis to get the EBS purchase orders into our system. Now, in this case, once again, we're closing out and heading for the next application. We actually have a few steps in there to generate a fake person. That's not necessarily a feature of our product, but it's certainly something that many of us do. It's simply a concept of using automation to find or generate its own data. And so before we head into the Salesforce Lightning application, this one is designed to query from a baby names database and then put a random first and last name together and build a person. Austin Mann is that person. We flashed them on the screen there just for a second. And now it's headed down the path of heading into Salesforce Lightning for the purpose of building an opportunity just like we were originally capturing together. Once again, we've launched the application. We usually do some initial checks with the automation to confirm the environment that we're running in and that everything's ready to proceed. But now it's navigating to the opportunity and entering the data. There's Austin Mann, our randomly generated person. Now what that means is the automation is more self-sufficient with its data. When you use automation to find or generate its own data, you're basically doing what your manual testers used to do anyway, and you're making your process what we refer to as on demand. That means you can run it on demand without needing to go get the data. In fact, that's the last thing we want to hear our customers say is, we're ready to run the automation, so let's go get the data. There is another best practice that I have not brought up today around data management and using the automation for that purpose that we have given other webinars on, and we are certainly glad to have that conversation at any time and to go deeper in that way. Next, we go into the Fiori order. So again, these steps may look familiar, but today I simply wanted to really reinforce the power of this codeless automation and the speed of our ability to build that automation for the purpose that is intended. So in this case, we've placed our Fiori order. We are now headed into the GUI. Oh, no, sorry. That step was taken out. Now we are headed to the AS400 to do the fulfillment. So green screen, mainframe, AS400, DOS screens, whatever is needed, we can still accommodate with the automation. In this case, we were using the order number to go in and perform the fulfillment within our AS400 so that we can then come back into the GUI and take a screenshot of the document flow. And now it's done. So much like we had the the documentation from before, we can generate documentation for the automation results and evidence. I won't take the time to do that because it's the same concept. What we are seeing is the step-by-step results. Once again, because I ran this interactively, it brought them directly back to my screen so that we can see that in this case, everything has passed. And we have tested this end-to-end business process the exact same way that the users would have tested it. And I intentionally used the plural, users, because often when we get to this level, we are talking about multiplayer experiences where the automation is signing in to represent the various roles along the way. So extremely valuable, and basically making sure throughout that we are testing the system, the applications, the exact same way that the users are using it. So next up is best practice number 2, test every change. And this may seem a little bit obvious. I know you would if you could, but you can. We've just discussed and seen how easy it is to build automation with Worksoft. The next step is to run the heck out of it, to literally test every change. With Worksoft, you can run your automation on any physical or virtual resource. You can run automation in parallel and at scale, and you can run automation on any schedule or DevOps trigger. Quite flexible. We now have stories of customers running over 500,000 steps regularly. And one story that really stuck out for me was a customer running over 2,000 hours of manual equivalent testing in a 5-hour window. That's over a person year worth of testing. And I think this case was being run daily, if I remember correctly. We do this with our continuous testing manager, and I'd like to give you a glimpse. Before we jump in, this is a high-level representation of what I'm about to show you. The purple circle in the middle represents our continuous testing manager portal. We're going to sign in and take a look. This is where we have the control manually to control what should run, when it should run, where it should run, all of the above and more. The testing is doled out to those physical or virtual machines or resources like what I was referring to. We do that with agents. So all of the control comes from the central portal, but we're controlling other resources doing the job. And what this means is that we can remain productive on our workstation. No longer are we really going to run this automation on our desktops. I was doing a lot of that today just for demonstration purposes, but even from our editor, we have the ability to make changes when needed and then say, go run that in the background and send me the results when you're done. Of course, I can go spy on it, and I'll give you a glimpse of that. Let's jump in to take a look. So again, we call this our continuous testing manager. We can package automation into what we refer to as suites. I'm going to kick one off and get this underway. And then I'm going to go back while it's signing in and setting up to run on various virtual machines in the background. Let's just take a quick glimpse at some of the types of controls that I was referring to. When we package our automation, we're basically pulling in those same processes, those code-free automation processes, and yet we then get to control where they run. The one that I really like to point out is parallel versus sequential. Sometimes it is important that we control the sequence, and we can even create dependencies and only run certain things if other things have passed or if other things have failed. But as much as possible, we're going to leave this set to parallel so that we can do a lot more testing in a much shorter time period. When to run is extremely important. By setting a schedule, I can very easily do a set it and forget it. I need to run this daily or weekly and then simply receive the results back. But we can also do things on demand, and I'll point that out because that is very relevant in the agile world. When we are a part of a CI/CD pipeline, basically it is other products often performing a pipeline and calling us for us to do our part. And so we can participate in that quite seamlessly. Last but not least, we can control who can see and modify and who gets the results in the end. So very simple to work with in terms of what we're controlling, but I also mentioned that SPY, and this is the important part. What we're now witnessing is every few seconds, we'll get a desktop screen capture. This is, in this case, one machine with 3 sessions running in the background. And what it's doing is all of the work that I normally would have been doing manually. And it's also doing all of the work that I normally would have been doing on my own desktop. So these are multipliers. And this is what allows our customers to do so much testing in so little time and yet do it comprehensively. Getting those results quickly is extremely important. And that's the glimpse that I wanted you to see from our continuous test manager. This is the reason why you literally can test every change. With that, let's get back and hit our final best practice. Don't build your automation, discover it. So we've seen an important mechanism for this with capture, but let's reinforce and elaborate on the results that come from applying this best practice. Remember those 6,000 testers I mentioned from earlier? Basically, capture provides the opportunity for us to understand exactly what they're doing and turn that into automation. Ariel Corporation just did this with us recently. They said it was so easy, they had a number of co-op students providing captures quickly. Capturing key user activity provides you with an automated version of those users, your users. And another very important thing to add is that Worksoft is generally agnostic to the environment. Where I'm going with this is that we've had many customers capture production user activity and then use it for automated testing. So let me let that sink in for a second. Those users were not going out of their way to build automation, yet that's what they were doing by just doing their jobs. They weren't going out of their way to build documentation, yet that's what they were providing by just doing their jobs. So capture extends to even leveraging production users in that way to very rapidly build up automation. And it's a total win-win because, once again, they're not doing that distinctly for the purpose of building automation or documentation. And even within specific business processes, there are often variations of the way that your users perform them. And if you're not testing them all, then you have gaps in testing. And with Worksoft, you can begin to understand exactly what you're dealing with. Let's take a look at what this can look like in Worksoft's process intelligence. So to do that, I'm going to head back to my playground and bring up our process intelligence. Now, there's a lot here on the surface to get to eventually, but what I'd really like to do is drill in and show you some data. I'm going to navigate into my order to cash space, and let me just kind of reinforce in this way. What we're currently looking at is a capture, an order to cash process that was captured by a user. And this is what it looks like in the system when we pull that into our process intelligence. We get an understanding of all of the activities along the way. And in fact, without going into the weeds today, there's a lot of metrics around the timing and the frequency that was involved. And we'll get to that mention more in just one second. But basically, by having a user perform this capture, that provides my ability to use it for automation. So let's extend that. By then having more users do captures, the picture begins to expand. With each capture that's being performed, the users are providing extremely valuable information about how they perform their process. So beyond just the steps involved for how they do it, also now the variations of how, for example, our order process is being performed. And in fact, in the set of data that we happen to be looking at, if I go all the way to the extreme, it looks pretty much like spaghetti. This customer has 51 different variations of the way that they're doing their order to cash process, and there's actually some inefficiencies involved with that. What I mean by that is this. Let's make it a little bit more simplified just so that we can visualize what I want to show you. But when I was talking about some of those flips and switches that we can perform to see and understand this data, we can, for example, turn on things like how frequently were my users doing this? And at the moment, what this is showing is that the thicker lines are showing the more common paths that my users were taking. And yet duration is also extremely important. How long were these activities taking? So the green are things that are falling within tolerance. Yellow is falling outside, and red is something alarming that we need to look at. So above and beyond just understanding the processes, where I'm going with this is we're extending into the ability now to provide additional value in other ways. Our primary objective may have been to go after testing. And I've shown you that as we build up and bring those captures in, that we're painting the picture of exactly what's happening in the system. But this basically leads us to our bonus topic for today. And without going back to the slides, I'll just do it while I'm here. What I mean by this is our dashboard allows us to surface this information in a very valuable way. It becomes a real-time ROI calculator, if you will. So let me break this down just a little bit, and I'm not going to hit on everything today, yet we are happy to go much deeper in any amount of follow-up. But just by going after automation, for example, and doing those captures, we begin to see the activity in the system. And by seeing that, we understand the value that can come from providing automation. This is a very simple calculation. It is, how often do we see these things happening? How long do they take? And that's what I was referring to earlier. And then we allow you to associate a weighted cost to represent the ROI, but that's what allows us to paint the picture of potential savings. So there's a real incentive to go after providing automation for all of this manual activity. We're going to monitor your coverage along the way, and we're going to give you credit for the things that you begin to use with automation. So as you turn your testing from manual into automation and you run it in the continuous test manager, those results feed back. We call it a closed loop. They feed back to update our ROI calculator to understand the value of our automation at any given moment, as well as the value of where it can go. Now, beyond this, and I'm going to show you a couple of slides to introduce you to the full platform briefly here towards the end of our presentation. But the reason our dashboard contains more is because there's overlapping value in these initiatives. And I realize that my audience today is probably mostly, if not completely, interested in automation. But by doing automation, those captures can also help us understand the business processes so that we can provide process optimization, and there's savings as a result of that as well. So by doing the captures for automation, the digital transformation team can benefit, and they can go after savings. And when those efficiencies are applied, we will show the realization of that, and that too can be measured. RPA is another opportunity. Automation for testing, at its core, is just automation. So we can begin to reuse these assets also to go beyond testing and allow them to help us with our business processes. And with Worksoft, that's pretty much what we're doing with RPA. We make it easy, and everything that we talked about today, capture, codeless automation, reusability, and leveraging existing assets, all falls right into RPA to facilitate the effort. And when you begin to use the automation in RPA forms, or production automation, basically, we're going to show you the realization of that. The only final mention there is that to do this in our platform, we've completely segregated it and provided very strong governance to satisfy the security divisions. So if your company is interested in RPA, why not leverage assets that you're already using for testing to do this? And if you're not interested in RPA, put us in touch with those that are, and we'd be happy to tell more of this story. But before I let you off the hook there that easily, we talked earlier about the automation finding or generating its own data. That's basically RPA. So RPA can actually play a role to assist you with your data needs in the automation testing realm. And yet again, that represents the overlap that I'm referring to. So let me get back to my slides and let's round this out. And I'm happy to take any questions that we have time for. But before we do, there's our bonus. Know the value of your automation. And the Worksoft platform makes that extremely simple. That dashboard, as mentioned, is going to show the overlapping value, but yet also monitor your progress along the way. And something we didn't even get into, it's got mechanisms to guide you to the next most valuable task that you can go after with automation, for example. So there's great value that comes from the full platform. It basically looks like this. The certified automation is codeless, and we are certainly predicated on that. We've been doing this forever, and it's quite mature and powerful and sustainable. Capture, as we talked about, was originally built in and still is, but is also separatable or distributable so that users can contribute, and they can basically help us build up our regression testing suite, for example. Process intelligence now allows us to send those captures not just into automation, but also leverage them for analytics and recommendations to where we need to be going with our automation. Some things we didn't really talk about today is we have the ability to ingest process mining data, whether that's from Celonis or Signavio. This can really help facilitate the big picture view of what are my users doing and where do I need to go with automation. And last but not least, the automation is extremely simple now to comprehensively use for testing our systems the way we need to and testing every change. And yet the automation can also provide RPA, or automation in production. And those things can be shared, and everything that's being done is a closed loop to feedback for that process intelligence journey. Basically, when it comes to the Worksoft platform, there are immediate benefits. You literally go from zero to automation faster than any other industry solution. So that's why we wanted to introduce these best practices and reinforce the fact that the Worksoft platform is designed around achieving your results with those best practices. In summary, those best practices were to test your applications exactly the way the users use them, to test every change, and you've seen that that's possible. Don't build automation, discover it. And this is a paradigm shift in thinking. I will never forget a conversation I had at a conference with someone that basically said, there's no way that we're going to be able to build the automation that we need by the next release cycle. And I said, well, let me show you something. And we sat down and we went through capture. And I said, what if you could use all of your users, or at least key users, to do captures? You could build this stuff like all of your users do their activities within the boundaries of a workday. If capture were involved, you are building, or rather discovering, your automation very rapidly. So it is attainable, and that you need to consider that paradigm shift in thinking. And then the bonus is, along the way, understand the value of your automation. Another story that I will never forget is a customer telling me that we are our own worst enemy, or at least we used to be. What he was referring to is, he said, Ty, we use your automation and we fixed a lot of problems, and the upper management was extremely happy about that. But now, a couple of years down the road, they're not seeing those same problems, and they're saying, okay, we fixed that problem, let's get rid of Worksoft. And my resource was saying, no. Worksoft is the reason that we continue to not see problems in our system. So by understanding the value of your automation, you can quantify and justify that for any conversation that you need to have. The value is extremely large in various ways that you can get from the Worksoft platform. Our customers are achieving this. Others are starting to understand, and we would love to have more conversations about how you can achieve these same results within your company. Thank you for attending today, and I'm happy to take any questions that we have time for.
Thank you so much, Ty. We've just got a few questions today. We've only got a few minutes left. Our first one today is, how does your licensing work?
Oh, great question. We want everyone to take full advantage of the capabilities within our platform. So we now have a flex licensing model. It is still concurrent, but those concurrent users can access every part of our application. So everything and more that we saw today would be usable by a concurrent license of our product.
Great. Our second one today is, would I be able to test our e-commerce website?
Absolutely. We love SAP, but we are often thought of as the SAP testing tool. The fact is, pretty much anything you get to in your Windows operating system, we can provide automation for.
Great. And our third one, we've got just a little bit more time. Is Worksoft an on-prem solution?
It can be. We are very flexible in that way. So we can be on-prem or in private cloud or any hybrid form of that. So I think we're a little bit unique in that way too, possibly, but extremely flexible. Everything that I showed you today happened to be coming from cloud workstations.
All right, that looks like all the questions we have. Thank you so much, Ty. That concludes our webinar session for today. Thank you everyone for your participation and have a great day.